Hello, everybody. I'm Hilary Sloan, and this is Driftwood Conversations. Today, I'm sitting down with Reid Wilkie, a shamanic practitioner and tarot reader whose path began long before she had language for it. Rachel grew up in the English countryside, sensing the unseen, and later found herself drawn across continents and into the desert, where something in her clicked into place. In this conversation, we talk about her first solo vision quest at Red Rock Canyon, how poetry became a private doorway into spirit, and how her training unfolded through the Andes and the Amazon, as well as through an intensive apprenticeship with a Peruvian master taught entirely online. We also explore what it means to live with dual perception, how discernment lives in the belly, and why many people are feeling a spiritual pull right now, right alongside environmental urgency.
My name is Reid Wilkie.
And what do you do? Where are you from? And how did you get here?
Beautiful. Well, first, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Hilary, for having me on your show. I really appreciate that. I'll begin by saying where I was born. I was born in Cambridgeshire in England, but I did leave the country when I was about 21 years old. And that took me to Europe, it took me to New York, it took me to Los Angeles. And now I'm here in the Joshua Tree area, and I love living in the desert.
So many people do.
Yes.
It's incredible. It's magical.
It's magical and it's magnetic. And in the same way that it magnetizes those who are meant to be here, I think it also has the power to actually invite others to leave who do not resonate with her energy. So yes, I feel honored to be here.
What got you here?
Well, to be honest, I was drawn to the northern Mojave first before the Joshua Tree community. So my husband and I actually spent many, many years up in the northern Mojave towards Lone Pine. But what instigated that particular choice to live up there for a while was on my first visit to Los Angeles, which must have been about 17 years ago. It didn't really work out for me energetically. And so I took myself off to the desert on my own on a vision quest. I had never even been to the desert before. I didn't know what I was doing. I got in my clapped out Mercedes with the boot filled with bottles of water, avocados, and protein bars.
Balanced.
Right. And I just set off to the desert for a week. And a dear friend of mine said, well, why don't you try Red Rock Canyon? And so this is along the 395 as you're heading up towards the northern Mojave. And so I went out to live in the desert. And of course, this was a big thing for a British girl heading into the desert for the first time. I didn't take a tent. I didn't take any equipment with me. I literally just took a couple of blankets and a pillow. And when I got to Red Rock Canyon, I found these amazing caves and these beautiful rock structures. I'm not sure if you've been to that particular national, it might be a state park, but it's protected land. And I drove up, this was August, it was the burning heat, but there I was and I found a cave and I thought, this is beautiful. I'm just going to live in my cave. And I took with me my phone to record some poetry. I took my notebook to write down some poetry, and I took this little video camera to do some sort of video poems. You know, I was really just spending time with myself in the desert to perhaps find an aspect of myself that I felt was lost. And so that was my first experience to the desert. And from that moment, I just completely fell in love with the land and the texture and the smell and the sound and the peace and the winds, those beautiful melodic winds that blow across the landscape.
So I happen to know that you read tarot and you have a spiritual practice, but were you doing it at that point or even earlier?
I would say that I engaged actively with my spiritual practice after that moment, but this was actually one of the adult callings. As a child, I grew up with the fairies at the bottom of my garden, and I had full-blown conversations with them. We danced together, we played together, they advised me, they guided me. I even roped in a couple of my girlfriends from the village, and we we created a fairy club, and it was very sweet. But as I grew into my teenage years and then my young adult years, I realized that I was experiencing ghosts, spirits around me on a regular basis. You know, as I said, I actually left home when I was about 18, 19 years old and began living in rental apartments, rental homes with flatmates, without flatmates, and then traveled around Europe. And pretty much everywhere I went, I would encounter a presence, a spirit, perhaps an entity or a past life, a past soul that was perhaps struggling to transit. I didn't have any formal training. I didn't have a mentor I could turn to. I simply engaged with them and I just followed my intuition, and I would work with the spirits and the ghosts to see what they needed, what was their calling, why were we engaging, how could I help? And sometimes I was successful in assisting them in their lives, as they were very gracious in accepting me in their life also. So my spiritual engagement, I suppose, was of pure experience within the landscape of my material life. And yet it wasn't until that trip to the desert when I realized it's now a responsibility and an obligation and a desire to engage actively in the realms of spirit so that I may understand this experience on a deeper level.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's kind of poetic.
Thank you. Yes. That's interesting that you bring that up, because poetry has been a way for me to perhaps channel my higher self, or perhaps channel my inner self, perhaps, through the written word. That has been my cathartic process. It's been a reflection of my spiritual unfolding over the years, because poetry for me was me scribbling down in little black notebooks over the years for me to simply reflect and contemplate my experiences. As I said, I didn't have a mentor in the physical realm, a teacher or a mentor or someone who could be my way shower at that time. And so I only had my higher self or my inner self to rely on. And so poetry became a very crucial and integral part of my spiritual development. And yet it was sub rosa. It was unseen. It was unspoken for many years. It wasn't something that I shared with others for many, many years.
Are you sharing it now?
I am, yes. Thank you for asking. And I love it. Sometimes I do perform it. There was a moment when I was living in New York and I would just get down to the East Village and hit all the open mics and just build my confidence to actually express these most deeper, innermost thoughts and contemplations. And then I realized, I quite like sitting behind the mic.
Isn't that funny? It's wonderful, but it's not for everybody.
Absolutely.
I mean, I feel like I found my home.
Yes.
It works perfectly, but I wouldn't have known that.
Yes, exactly. And I think that you're tapping into something really beautiful here. It's the courage to experiment first in order to experience that which makes us tap into our most authentic self. And like you said, perhaps in one moment of our lives, scribbling and liberating the thoughts and processing the mindscape on page using the power of the pen. That's a beautiful outlet, and that's a beautiful channeling of the higher mind and tapping into aspects beyond perhaps the conceptual mind. And yet then being more of an inward process, then there's the other self-expression, which is actually sharing that with others. And I think we basically flow through those yin and yang states where sometimes it is about sharing, and then we must always honor that moment when sometimes it's actually not about sharing at all. And we can go through the larger arcs of these cycles, but we can also go through the momentarily shorter cycles of this, even from morning to night, where we honor both. Yes.
It's interesting. So I wrote poetry as a child, and then I wrote everything.
Yes.
And I could never quite ground it, and I couldn't ground me. I really didn't have the ability to get me on the earth in the physical body. So I decided to put anything like poetry or fiction away.
Oh, yes.
And it became very necessary to just be here.
Yes.
And so that got me into nonfiction.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
Which got me into the radio and journalism and all of that.
Wonderful.
And recently, as I'm going back and now it's time, I'm grounded enough that I could bring all that back.
Oh, that's lovely, yes.
And my inner wisdom said, write poetry.
Wonderful.
And I almost got shocked. Well, I was shocked. I got kind of shocked by it. It was like, why? And they said, don't ask, just write.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful.
And I do know even language, foreign languages, other languages, do something different to the brain.
Yes.
It opens us up. I don't remember all the science on it, but it opens us up to parts of ourselves that we don't have easy access to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing to say. And just to comment on the grounding in order to liberate, I think is really, really important. It seems like they're opposing powers of grounding the physical body into the material realm. And yet it's that very grounding, that rooting, that actually allows the tree, therefore the branches and the outreach to reach higher. And so I think, especially in terms of poetry, artistic creation, and of course the magical realms, we often speak about reaching high, reaching outward, reaching beyond. Absolutely, yes. But in order to reach further, we need to ground deeper.
I think the image that came up when you were talking is the tree has the potential, the seed has the potential to be the tree.
Yes.
Always does, always has that. But if you don't put it in the ground and give it water and nutrients, it won't grow.
Absolutely, yes.
And I think for me, that was a huge mistake about spirituality.
Well, I believe it's a common misconception. I do believe that, we tend to speak to the spiritual world as being out there. We literally have it in our own language, our Western language, I would say. We speak to spirituality being out there, or fly higher, or reach above, or we tend to gaze upwards and speak about the heavens, generally speaking. And yet it's a misconception, because the spiritual world is just as much grounded here in the material realm as any other realm. The realms of spirit transgress all realms, all planes of existence, and there is as much spirit and energy and potency within literally our Mother Earth at the soils from whence we're born. And she is a spiritual body that is literally hosting us and holding us here in this physical reality.
So that's a perfect segue to what do you do now? What is your work?
Thank you for asking. Yes, so over the years, like I mentioned, since my trip to the desert, it activated something in me where I realized that I did need to seek for, I would say, spiritual guidance, let's put it that way. And at the time, I was actually working in the fashion industry. So you can't really get more superficial than that. Although I must say I met so many beautiful people. And there is something that I value about dressing and making oneself feel empowered, making oneself feel beautiful. So there are many, many positive outcomes and responses and expressions through design, through clothing, and through creating an identity that one needs to step into at certain points in their lives. But in that moment, I was searching for the inward journey. I was actually now called to not step away. I still held down my career, but I was called to actually begin the inward journey. And so I was very fortunate around the time when I took the trip to the desert that I also met my husband. And you've met my husband. He's a very spiritual individual also. And we connected. It's like we recognized each other. Within the beauty of falling in love, we moved to New York together. We started a whole life together. It was absolutely beautiful. But within a very brief period, I would think within almost just our first year of being together, we were called to take a trip down to the jungle. meaning the Amazon jungle. And we took our first trip to Peru. We traveled up into the Andes. We visited Machu Picchu. We met, worked, trained with the shamans up there of the northern Andes. And we then traveled down into the Amazon, and we did our first plant medicine journey with ayahuasca. And it was life-changing, quite simply life-changing. This was perhaps about 14 years ago. With this utter reveal for me personally about not only Mother Earth and her beautiful, magnificent presence, but I was also carried on a journey to understand the origin of where it all began. It was a big, epic journey, and I just felt at one with the universe. I felt at one with Mother Earth. And yet, coming out of the journey, I realized that it was my time to actually step in and bring this spiritual energy into my physical body and into my material world around me. And so returning to New York, we were very fortunate to find a shaman who was living in New York, who had been on the path for over 40 years, was dedicated to the path. We began training. My husband joined me initially also, and we were fascinated, and we both began training with this shaman who's now become a dear, dear friend of ours and still is one of my dear mentors. And this was monthly training that went on for 3 or 4 years in New York. And it was my question to myself was, how do I re-engage with this explosive, incredible, mystical, magical energy of spirit? How do I do it now without the plant medicine? How do I access this from within me? Perhaps with the assistance of the drumming, of the frequency, yes, the rattling, the journey, the shamanic journeying. But how do I tap into this on a regular basis when not only I need support from spirit, but when I need to receive directions and guidance from spirit directly?
And how do you do that? So that became the next journey.
Right. Yes. And it was fascinating because there is a certain beat and a certain frequency of the drum, of the shamanic drum, and or the rattles that accompany it. And it actually does create within the human consciousness, it does create a certain frequency where the individual can actually access what we term the shamanic state. And this is where you are transgressing the veil. This is where you're becoming half in this world, in the conscious world, and half beyond the veil in the spirit realm. The purpose of this shamanic practice is so that you can actually operate in the spiritual realms, but also be conscious and aware of what's happening around you in the physical world as well. So it's like accessing this state of dual perception. I would say it's about accessing that dual state of consciousness at specific times when it's appropriate to do so. Now, that's not to say you can't receive messages at any time, and you can still be an open vessel to receive. So it's really about using that frequency of the rhythm, tapping into the heartbeat of Mother Earth, and actually doing it in a relationship with the spirit world. So it's a devotional practice. It's a focused practice. Of course, the practice itself can be done alone if you know what you're doing. And of course, in my case, I do work with clients. So I will work from that shamanic state when I'm working with clients.
What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question because each and every session is very unique. I actually love how unique it is. I sometimes get a few downloads before a session of intuitively what they might need, but when the drums start and I enter into that state, I don't pre-plan what's going to happen. I've got my toolkits. I've got, I might have an idea. It might be a soul retrieval. I might have an idea. It might be a cord cutting. It might be an ancestral healing. There could be many different aspects of the session that needs to unfold. But prior to the session, I also keep myself wide open because in the moment, spirit guides, whether it's my spirit guides, spirit in the infinite spirit, I trust that what's happening in the moment, that is what we need to be doing in that moment.
When I was looking at your website, you went to Peru.
Well, the Amazon crosses many countries. So the Amazon actually is Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, and then maybe there's a little bit of Bolivia in the Amazon also. Yes.
Okay, so where did you work? Where did you go?
Yes, that's a good question. I've studied and trained with shamans both in the Peruvian Andes and the Ecuadorian Andes because we have the mountain ranges and then we also have the Amazon ranges. And so again, the Amazon in Peru and in Ecuador. There's also the rainforest area also in Ecuador, and I've trained there with some shamans and medicine carriers in Ecuador too. So this has sort of happened over the last decade, these trips, and it's been a collection of trainings and studies. And I would like to say that even though each different indigenous peoples has different ways of engaging with the spirit realm. They might have a certain different altar, medicine wheel that they set up. Because of this general area of the Andes and the Amazon, there's actually a lot of similarities also. It goes beyond the white man's borders. You know, we see them as being divided up into different countries, but actually a lot of the indigenous peoples, their land could even have actually spread over 3 different borders because, of course, they didn't chop up the land and divide it by country. There's a lot of similarities also that spread through the indigenous peoples, as some were more nomadic, some were more stationary, some didn't even have any human contact either with any other tribe. And I'm sure you've heard about these peoples. But what's beautiful is that I find that I'm weaving together both my Peruvian training and my Ecuadorian training. And they actually look very different on the outside. But the cosmology and the alignment of the sacred connection to spirit through the land, through the mountains, through the jungle, through the animal spirits, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of commonalities between them.
How did you become introduced to them? I mean, it would be totally foreign to me.
Yes. Well, interestingly, so the first trip that we went down to Peru, when my husband and I traveled down there, we just traveled down there on our own. And we had it lingering in the back of our minds that we wanted to connect with the indigenous peoples and we wanted to do a ceremony. We were in Cusco, we literally met someone in the market. And I know that just sounds so wild, but when you're backpacking around the world, you just feel the energy. And so we did a beautiful peyote ceremony with that particular shaman that we met in the market who was actually buying products. And then following that, we then met this beautiful guide who took us on the 8-day trail to get to Machu Picchu. So we spent 8 days on the trail, walking the mountains, hiking the mountains, camping. And he was just imparting all of his wisdom and his cultural knowledge to us. And so inadvertently, we spent 8 days with this incredible, beautiful human being who was sharing so much about their culture and how they engage with these practices. And then, as I said, when we traveled down to the jungle, then we literally ended up in this tiny little town on the edge of the Amazon. And they said, well, we know a shaman if you're interested and you have to go and see him. He's incredible. And then before we knew it, within 2 days, we were in the middle of a jungle and we were having an ayahuasca ceremony. And yes.
What language do they speak?
Well, primarily Spanish, because, of course, the colonization of the land. But their native tongue is Quechua. Yes.
And what do you speak? I mean, could you communicate with them?
Well, because I lived in Italy, when I left England at 21 and lived in Italy, I speak fluent Italian. And so that doesn't mean I speak Spanish, but I can understand a lot of Spanish. And sometimes I can fumble my way through the Spanish language. Now, since I've had more official training, I do understand some Quechua words. Not in the form of a sentence, but I know some of the sacred words that are used in Quechua to speak to certain spirits, certain allies, and the sacred 4 directions and things that are relative to my work, because I actually love language. Yes. And so it's very important for me as I'm working with a tradition that I've been officially initiated into, that I also honor the language and the power of the spoken word, speaking that word in the original tongue. That for me in itself is an invocation.
Oh, yes. And it goes with your poetry and everything we just spoke about.
Yes, absolutely. So in addition to actually traveling down to the countries, I did want to share with you that I did a 1-year apprenticeship with a Peruvian master. And would you believe it? It was on Zoom. So I just want to say that this is incredible how it is possible to actually learn and train and study over the transmission of the digital platforms that we have today. And his name is Puma Freddy Quispe Singona, and he is an incredible master, an incredible teacher. And so I signed up for a whole year full-time apprenticeship with him. And it was all conducted over Zoom. We did ceremonies over Zoom. We did transmissions over Zoom. We had 3 sessions, 3 days training every single week for a whole year. And it was incredible. And assignments, and monthly assignments. And it was awesome. It was like doing a PhD. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so thrilled that he, as a teacher, opened himself up to become that kind of global teacher. And he's an indigenous shaman from, not from Cusco, but from Chinchero, which is a town very close to Cusco in Peru. And he has a beautiful following. So if you need more information about him, he's awesome, because I must say that I was blown away by the intensity of the program, the depth of the training, and also the fact that it was all conducted over Zoom. He said to me, the 5th element is technology. I love that.
That goes perfectly with my question that's kind of stirring. Do you feel that this is your soul calling? I mean, from before it even started, because it's fallen into place. My journey is very different than yours, and I know it's my soul. It hasn't quite distilled in the terms of being able to name it. And that's kind of a struggle for me, but I even think that's part of the soul calling.
Absolutely, yes. And thank you for asking that, because I feel I have tapped into my most authentic self over the last 7 years, because it was really 7 years ago when I said, okay, I've done this preliminary training, I've learned this, now I want to actually dedicate myself to this. And with that comes an aspect of fear, in sense of like, can I do this? Is this right? But I knew it was right. I knew, like you said, it was a soul calling. And I recognize I'm a white female. I'm a female in a white-skinned body. And I've been blessed and initiated and encouraged by my mentors, who are primarily indigenous teachers, holding the lineage that had been passed down by their grandfather and their grandfather beyond. And I've been called to be there in that present moment, and to be blessed with these teachers who make it very clear that their soul mission is to spread their wisdom to the world, regardless of skin, creed, or color. And I feel that that is just one of the most beautiful gifts that I could have received from my mentors, and the multiple mentors that I've worked with. And so yes, I do believe it's a soul calling, because the way I look wouldn't represent that calling. It's not about my skin color. It's not about where I grew up in the English countryside. It's not necessarily me having been a fashion designer for 20 years. And so what makes my heart sing is literally how I am in the presence of spirit, and in the presence of these actions and ceremonies and rituals that have been passed on to me. And I take that with reverence, and I take that with a sense of true gratitude for those who were in that position in their lives as their soul calling to pass that on to me.
Do you think the fact that this is being brought into different cultures, to different people, has to do with the time that we're in?
I believe so. I think that does have a big influence on what's happening, I think, generally, especially in the Western Hemisphere, that we have perhaps consciously opened up to it. Now, if we speak to a prophecy which is spoken outwardly, particularly within the indigenous peoples of the Ecuadorian Andes and the shamans that I've worked with there, they speak of the prophecy of the condor and the eagle from North America and the condor from South America. And they speak of the eagle as perhaps the divine masculine in the sense that it's the mind, it's the logic mind, it's the scientific mind, it's the programming, the structure, it's everything that we kind of associate with the masculinity, the divine masculine energy of the universe. And the condor is the heart. The condor is the heart, it's the compassion, it's the inner knowing, it's the going with the flow. And this, of course, is considered the divine feminine energy of the universe. And the prophecy was spoken of for many, many, many hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. And the prophecy is that there will come a time when the eagle and the condor will fly in the same skies.
Oh, wow.
That's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Now, according to their Pachacuti, which is the time scale, the prophecies, they did speak to it was really the early 90s. They spoke to the early 90s as the portal in which the eagle and the condor could begin this journey of flying together in the same skies. Now, what actually happened down in South America is that in the middle of the 90s, rather at the beginning of the 90s, there was a big indigenous revolution. And there were actually a lot of participating North American white people that came down to support them, to liberate them so that their indigenous spiritual practices would no longer be illegal to practice. And so for the first time in generations, the indigenous peoples, in particular the shamanic arts of healing and spirituality, they were actually allowed to be performed outside of being hidden from view. And so even though maybe a couple of generations had been demonized, in particular by the Catholic Church and the colonization of the lands, there had been a few generations that had had to go underground and hold the flame and hold the traditions and these teachings. And then they were able to resurface in the early 90s. And with that, it was also the open arms to welcome the white people of North America down to their soils so that they could actually transmit these teachings before the elders died. And with the influx of the white people actually curious and interested to learn these indigenous practices that had been lost from our own white culture for millennia, then it was an opportunity for them to also hold space for their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, for them to also participate in these beautiful ceremonies and indigenous practices that were now being rebirthed through the participation of visiting white folk from North America.
What is happening with the land down there? I just went to a conference. It was an environmental conference at the Living Desert. And there was a gentleman who is working in the Amazon. Mm. And there is a lot of development threatening to move in.
Absolutely. It's true. There is, the threats are coming from many, many different directions. Of course, oil, also palm oil, and of course, deforestation for cattle. And of course, as you mentioned, other forms of development and industry that are coming in to actually destroy some of the ancient forests of the Amazon. This has been going on for decades, but it's happening at such an exponential rate at this moment that it's a very, very real threat, not only to the ecosystem of the whole world, as the rainforest is that incredible, the lungs that are breathing back to us what we need to survive. It's one of the greatest beautiful forestations of the earth that's still remaining, and yet it's being consumed very, very rapidly from development, oil, palm oil. I'm very happy to say that I've heard and I've experienced firsthand with my shaman who visits who travels from New York and spends half his time down in the jungle every year and has been doing for decades. He works with a number of organizations that are actively working with the indigenous peoples to reforest the jungle. And so there are a lot of organizations that have it as their primary operation to actually protect the indigenous lands, to whether they're coming from the legal aspect to protect the lands themselves, whether they're able to allow tribes and indigenous peoples to cross over the borders so that they can actually re-inherit and reoccupy their old traditional lands. And of course, reforest the trees that have been removed from other areas. So, and also grow their own food and vegetables so they're also able to sustain themselves so that they themselves can sustain their family and not have to then perhaps commit to actually working for one of the local industries or earn money as we would earn money and then support the deforestation of their own land.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm so glad to hear it.
Yes. There's so much more work to do, absolutely. And it's going to be an onward battle, I believe, until eternity, meaning the commitment is there, the responsibility is there. But of course, as we know, the powers that run these great big corporations, they are powerful industries. And of course, anything that we can do to uphold and sustain and offer, whether it's monetary, energy, but even being with the indigenous peoples, those who have invited you, of course, but participate in their traditions so that they can be upheld and they can be protected. And each time we visit, a large sum of our commitment in terms of financial commitment goes towards their cause.
Do you think, because we're at such a tipping point, between environmental and consciousness and in every area, we're at a tipping point where we can go either way. We can destroy ourselves or we can move into the spiritual realm and integrate it, because you can't do it alone. You can't do one or the other.
Right.
And do you think that's why many of us are being awakened?
Yes, I do. And it's, again, I just wanted to bring in another prophecy, which is coming from the Tibetan tradition. I mentioned that my husband is a meditator and he is steeped in the wisdom of a particular Buddhist path called Dzogchen. And the Tibetans actually, in their prophecy of their spiritual development through their community and their culture, they also actually predicted and foresaw that the rebirth of heightened consciousness, and of course with that comes access to spirituality, would also happen in the lands of North America, in the West particularly, a little bit of Europe and North America. They actually saw it. That again, for them also in the 90s, in the early 90s, they also saw an opportunity for their masters to actually understand that they could now start transmitting their ancient teachings to the white man in residing within the Western hemispheres of the globe. And of course, as you know, the Tibetans have been murdered, massacred, exiled from their homeland of Tibet. And of course, with this, their teachings primarily in the late 50s, they primarily went underground for some time, of course, in very sacred, safe areas of India. Of course, they were able to continue their teachings. But many of the great masters actually found their way to Europe and North America. But for many years, some of the highest teachings weren't transmitted. They weren't shared. But they knew that the time would come when and I say our because I'm considering myself now a Western being, but I mean it our as in the whole community of the Western Hemisphere, would actually be elevated to a level where we would be able to receive these higher conscious teachings, connecting us to a higher vibration of spirit. And to be honest, I feel it's almost like because we in our culture experience the absolute polarities. We have those that are working in the most devastating ways, which are working against the energy of spirit when we think of, spirit as the infinite light. And then, of course, because of that, because it's so dire and it's so dark, because of that, then you have the opposite power of light. The opposites, if it's one extreme, you will get the other extreme expressing itself on equal polarities. And so I believe that because almost the devastating experience that we're experiencing here from the Western Hemisphere, it's also the opportunity of the brightest light to be released. And I think that's why people like you, me, and our beautiful community around us, I think that's why we are all hearing clearly that we are being called to engage with spirit and bring that light back down to earth again.
I do think I'm a bit older than you are, but I do think a lot was seeded in the 60s.
Oh, I would agree with you there too. Yes.
Between music and
oh, yes,
the introduction to meditation. Certainly there were Indian gurus that came here,
yes,
that anchored things. And, humans are humans. They do what they do. But there was always something in all of it that brought the next and the next.
Yes, absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. It's almost like the whole 60s was preparation for this. I do believe that. Like you said, you plant the seed and the potential of the whole tree is in that seed. And yet it does take time to germinate. It does take time to crack through the surface. It does take time to express its first leaf. And then, of course, grow in strength and stamina to become the trunk so that it can truly be something that it can be of stature, of strength, of support, and become the pillar of spirituality. And I agree with you 100% that the 60s was planting the seed, and now I believe we do have the trunk. I believe we do have the tree. I think we experience the tree. We see the tree. We still have learning to do. We still have to refine ourselves, but I do believe that we are now in a period where many people are experiencing the growth within the structures and the various branches of spirituality.
What would you tell a young person, somebody say 30 down? What would you tell them if they're just coming into that period that maybe they're looking for their career and I don't know if the spiritual urges have come up yet, but maybe they're not sure, confused, even having a difficult time. What would you tell them?
That's a very good question. I think it's really important for young people to explore and experiment. I would certainly not advise somebody to sign up with something and declare it as their own. This is my path. Not at that age. I think just perhaps from my own personal experience, it took me many, many years, decades, to actually find the path that really made my soul sing. And I think that I would advise a younger person just to allow yourself to play and dance with the possibilities. Allow yourself to actually learn about different traditions. Experience it, though. Because for me, as I said, I've learned in many different ways. I read all the time. Like so many of them. I'm very academic in my studies too. And it's I love to read, but there's nothing like experiencing it and experiencing the magic activated within you. And I think that a younger human who is looking to engage in spirituality, I would say, well, explore. If you just have any inkling that might be a way that might bring a pleasure or an opening to you, explore it and experiment with it. But don't feel you have to commit. At that age, I believe it's the exploration that is more important than actually committing. But what I do think is I would ask them to choose carefully the mentor or the teacher that they wish to engage with. Because I think we all always need to appreciate that our power of discernment doesn't necessarily come from the place of, I want to learn this, therefore I'm going to do it, or I want to experience this, therefore I'm going to do it. But the power of discernment comes by feeling into it. And if a teacher or a mentor comes your way and it feels good, follow it. If it doesn't quite feel right, do not follow a teacher or a mentor who doesn't feel right.
I also would add to that, even at those ages where things can be very confusing, trust your deepest instincts.
Yes. And I think that's what I was referring to with the feeling into it. Yes. I agree, because there is so much chatter, there's so much mind fog happening today, especially with, our incredibly wild AI and digital existence. But you're right. There, we all have ourselves as our higher guide. We all have our higher intuition, our higher self guiding us. And we do have to tap into that, and we do have to trust that. But that trust is coming from the belly up. It's not coming from the mind down necessarily. And I think that I would advise a younger person, before you make a decision, before you lean in, feel it in your belly, the gut feeling, the instinct in your belly. Feel that, if that feels good, because your logical mind is very quick and very clever to tell you it's right or tell you it's wrong, but your belly won't lie to you.
The other thing I think I'd say is to really trust it, even if it doesn't happen immediately. If you have that sense, it will come to you.
Yes.
Books will fall off shelves. You'll meet strangers in weird places.
Yes.
Grocery stores or walking down the street.
Absolutely. Yes. That's so beautiful. And being able to recognize those signs that present themselves to you. And like you said, trusting the signs, trusting the synchronicities that are presented to you, because that is spirit speaking to you right there. That is your guides. That is your higher self that's guiding you along that particular path. Like you said, to engage with that particular stranger in the supermarket that drops a pearl of wisdom your way.
Right.
Yes.
And something I've heard lately as predictions, but I really trust this too. There's a lot happening that looks bad, but it may not be bad. It may open up and flower into something exquisite and perfect. So, and particularly as I remember my youth, it was difficult and challenging, but some of those deepest, darkest moments were the opening to something greater.
Absolutely, yes. And it's... I would just like to say, as you were sharing that with me, I was just seeing the beautiful dark space. It's that dark space that we are to engage in. We have day and night. And this is the bright sun during the day, but it's also the darkness of the night. And we need both. And it's that trust. Like the ancient cultures, they would pray at the dawn. They would pray that the sun would rise again, because they never quite knew whether the sun would actually show itself above the horizon again. And of course, we have the ancient Egyptians who, would have so many rituals and ceremonies just at dawn in order to call the sun in. But what that shows is that the rhythm of the darkness and the light, this is part of the cycle of being in this manifest world, in being in the three-dimensional reality. And we do have to honor the dark aspect of ourselves or our journeys where we don't know. We can't see the path ahead. We can't know for sure that is where we are going. And yet, to your point, that's when we trust. Yes.
And that really is the gem.
That's the gem. That really is the gem. Yes.
if somebody wanted to come to you, if somebody's feeling a pull right now, what would you offer them? I know it would be different for every person. And how do they reach you?
Thank you for asking. So, tonight we've spoken a lot about my path with the shamanic arts of healing. It's a way to work with somebody when they're feeling that perhaps their emotional body or their mental body or their physical body or their spiritual body is feeling disaligned, or it's feeling a sense of disharmony, perhaps incoherence, and they sense something's wrong, but they can't see it in their life. They're perhaps going through a moment of confusion or even a transition in their life. And working with the shamanic arts, we're able to really move those energies, working a lot with the sacred four energies, with the sacred four elements, and tying that into the physical temple so that they can actually resonate with harmony. And so, like I said earlier, this could come in the form of a shamanic soul retrieval or an ancestral healing, or it could be a cord cutting that needs to happen, or it could be literally working with the whole body. And I reference it as l'Olympia. It's a whole clearing, cleansing ceremony that can really release all of those negative energies that no longer serve and reharmonize and balance the whole luminous light body. So we're working with all aspects of the human experience. So that is something that if somebody's feeling that they really enjoy that aspect of the non-verbal aspect of purification, clearing, cleansing. I am also a tarot reader, and some people really find a lot of healing through the spoken word. And I think this is the poetic language, of course, but really through tarot, it's the mystical language. And my dedication also to the lineage of the Hermetic Kabbalah and the path of being an initiate into the Hermetic order. That's where a lot of my studies and my reading come in, and working with the Kabbalah and working with the Hebrew language as a mystical language to invoke and perform ritual magic that is very, very powerful. A lot of this knowledge, wisdom, and ancient tradition comes through my tarot readings with people. And so some people actually find that they actually need to hear it spoken back to them, because there is the power of the spoken word. As we know, it can be a spell or an incantation. It can be an invocation, or it can be an evocation. There is so much power in the vibration of the spoken word. And sometimes hearing their experience transcribed back to them through the spoken word can actually activate the healing within them. And so I do often find in my tarot readings, a lot of the shamanic energy work actually begins to manifest through the reading itself. And sometimes in my shamanic ceremonies, some of the chanting and the invocation from the Kabbalah actually enters into the healing work. Some might actually be wanting a little bit of a mixture of both, and I term that shamanic tarot because we're open to the session, how it's going to unfold, and it can be a combination of both energy, shamanic work, and also liberation and bringing clarity to the conscious mind through the spoken word of tarot.
Wonderful. How do people reach you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I do have an Instagram account, and that is my name. It's Rachel Reid Wilkie, and my link is in the profile. So anybody can reach me through Instagram and click on the link in the bio, and there'll be a drop-down menu, and there's a contact there for you.
You also have a website.
I do have a website that is also my name, rachelreidwilkie.com. So if somebody's interested in reading up a little bit more about the indigenous lineages that I've been initiated into and the work that I do, and want to dive deeper into a little bit more exploration of the work I do, more information could be found on my website.
Great. And I will list all of this in the podcast profile.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, Hilary, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And yes, I just want to reflect back to you what great work you are doing here and bringing our beautiful community to life and giving us a space here to express ourselves. It truly is a gift, and I'm truly grateful.
Thank you. And I must say, I've had 2 of your readings, and they've been profound.
Thank you.
Very profound.
Thank you. The tarot reading for me is setting the circle, and then we connect with the guides. Yes, the tarot itself takes some years of training to understand, the meaning behind all of the symbolism and the embedded wisdom of ancient teachings, which is embedded in each and every card. And that's a lifelong study. And yet, in the moment of reading tarot, I open up the circle, I call in my guides, I call in your guides, and then I channel what comes through. And so, yes, the cards are there as an illustration of the story of its unfolding, but truly the messages are channeled in the moment, uniquely for the person I'm sitting with. And that for me is me bringing my experience of the spirit realm and my way of communicating with the spirit realm. I'm so blessed that I now have a way that I can now gift this back to the community and sit with somebody on a one-on-one and get deep and actually use my talents of being able to connect for the purpose of activating clarity or healing or awakening within someone else. So it truly is a passion of mine. I love what I do.
I can tell that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was my conversation with Rachel Reid Wilkie. If you want to learn more about Rachel's work in shamanic healing, tarot, and what she calls shamanic tarot, you can find her on Instagram at Rachel Reid Wilkie. She also has a website at rachelreidwilkie.com, and I'll put all the links in the line show notes. If something in this conversation stayed with you, I'd love to hear what. It moved me deeply. You can leave a comment on Substack, share this episode, or send it to a friend who's been feeling that quiet pull to reconnect with spirit, with the body, and with the earth. Thanks for listening. This is Driftwood Conversations, and I'm Hilary Sloan.